Welcome, Web36, to another fabulous day of JavaScripting. I'm going to jump over to my screen. I love the raising the roof for JavaScript. I've got this Web36 objects code pen that I posted in Web36 channel. This is where we're going to be spending the majority of our time today. But something to note, good feedback from your TLs that are working with you. There's definitely been some confusion in me sharing a code pen and then you working not in code pen in the afternoon. That can lead to a lot of confusion because you're seeing me code here. And then the reason, of course, I'm doing this, the only reason I'm using code pen is to transfer knowledge quickly. So you can hit that refresh button. And as soon as I hit save, you've got my code. So you don't have, the point is that you're not like trying to feverishly type with me. You're absorbing, you're learning, and you're taking it to your afternoon. I think one of the biggest things that we missed, though, is we haven't actually talked about as a large group together and how you could use this stuff on your local machine to get your job done. And so just wanted to quickly talk about how we can do that. There's, of course, many varying ways. You could use the terminal. You could use the console. You could in VS Code. You could use VS Code Live Editor with a server. You don't have to use VS Code at all. You could use Notepad. I'm not even kidding. When I first started programming, I used Notepad++. That was my #1 tool. But one thing that I like to recommend is just going right into the browser. So whenever I work on my code, I'm going to go ahead and show you a project. Let's see here. I'm going to pull up. Let's see, web. We could do user interface. Okay, I'm going to share my file system with you. So there's my file system view. And so this is just a user interface project that we have done in the past. And so this has the actual folder structure inside of it. This is good for HTML and CSS. I think it's clear that you can understand that you double click this and it opens up in a browser and it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But when we start looking at JavaScript, that's when things can be a little bit more intense. So let's go find some JavaScript repo. So here's like JavaScript 4 or something. So go into these assignments, and then you can see we've got these JavaScript.js files. The interesting thing is there's literally 5 or 10 ways you could do this. For me personally, I like to just use the browser itself because it helps me understand like what it will look like in the wild. Of course, Live Server does basically the same thing. I'm not going to go over like how to install and use Live Server, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what this looks like in my way I like to work with it. So for example, I just double clicked that HTML file. Notice it's the HTML file here. And I always put a little note in my HTML files to check your work in the console because that's where the JavaScript is. How do you get to your console? Well, you right click and you hit inspect. And this should work on Safari, Firefox. Safari is a little bit finicky, but Firefox and Chrome, you have this console tab. And they're going to be slightly different between the browsers, but everyone should have a console tab. So now I should be able to see this console. This console is quite literally the same thing as this console that I'm using. Actually, I shouldn't say literally because this is CodePen's rendering of the console and it actually does not show you everything. So this console is actually way better than CodePen's console in terms of showing you errors and things. Like you can do anything in here that you can do in the console. Like what's 4 plus 4? It's 8. Let's put a let together and say let, my var assign the value of testing. And then I can come in here and say my var, and you can see that there's testing. It's like the console. So how do you work on projects? Well, going back to the file system, we come over here and using these JS classes, I can open these up in my editor, and then I can have my editor open. So I'm going to go ahead and just say Lambda classes, JS. I'll just drop it into Visual Studio Code. And while that's loading, I will swap over to Visual Studio Code with my screen. It's still loading, 1 second. Okay, there it is. So here's my VS Code. So if I were to write something here and say console.log testing, and then run that, well, let's just say testing this out so we can see something different. So notice I hit save, so my little X goes away here. If I put anything else in here, VS Code obviously gives a little bubble. If you hit save, it goes away. Okay, so that's how my work looks like on my local. I then go back to my browser, and if I refresh this, you can see testing this out shows up. So this seems disjointed from CodePen because CodePen's a one-stop shop. Everything's here. So if I were to say console.log, what up? And I got my settings were just auto runs, but I'm gonna turn this off because I actually like not having auto update. So I can control when I want it to go. You can see it works. So this same thing is occurring just in one centralized location. The disjointed feeling that you've probably had as you started working on this is that this is a different app. It's quite literally a browser. And then VS Code is an editing tool. But that's how you connect the dots there. Now, of course, there is VS Code's live server, which every time you hit save will update and refresh the browser, and I think it's awesome. There's a ton of different tools that you can use. If you don't even want to leave VS Code, you can put the console right inside of it. My favorite tool is Quokka.js. So this will actually give you inline JavaScript comments. You can see like right here, the result is 5 of adding 2 plus 3. So this is even more ingrained than anything you've been talking about in JavaScript, in that you don't have to go to any browser, you don't have to do anything, it's just all inline. So if you're interested in that, there's a free version and it's awesome. So I just want to like touch on that because a lot of your TLs talked about a disjointed feeling between CodePen and actually working on your projects. And the reason, again, why I do it is to try to actually give you the code as soon as possible and to have a reusable link that you can always reference. Of course, I could work on my local and then copy and paste everything up to a CodePen, but I want to have that live as soon as I save, you've got it. So that is the reasoning, but I'm starting to wonder if we shouldn't be using CodePen more than just delivering code. So noted, but I wanted to like call it out to say that's how projects should look like when you're actually working on them in the afternoons. Another thing I wanted to talk about is that there are still confusions around parameters, arguments, scoping. So I just wanted to do a quick review of that as well. So let's just write a function really quick. So remember, the function keyword is a trigger for us to know, oh, it's going to be guarding a block of code. But let's just go back to the basics really quick. Basics meaning 2 days ago. It's not been long. In this case, we have a block of code. So this is considered a block of code. And the reason we know that is because there's two curly braces. And that's how the browser is understanding and going to be interpreting our code, looking at these curly braces. So of course, if we put something inside of here, if we said console.log, I am a block of code, and then we just save this and run it. So we clear this and run. There's nothing protecting that block of code. It's just going to run. So this is no way to run an app, because in an application, we don't want everything to happen at the same time. We need to happen in certain sequential orders. So for example, if we were trying to pull up a medical record at a dentist office, you wouldn't want to pull up every record ever, every time the app loaded. That'd be inefficient and it'd be impossible to work. So we want to guard things. We don't want to use them until we need them. And so functions allow us to guard blocks of code like that by giving it a declaration or a name. So we come in here and say, protect this. And so in functions, we of course have these parentheses. So this whole statement right here is like part of the new thing. We're protecting this block of code. To get into the block of code, we of course can call it or invoke it. Protect this. So now let's see if we got into the block of code. So I'm going to say I'm in a block. Now I'm a function. So I'm going to say save and run. And now we should be able to get into that block of code because we called it. Of course, if we did not call it, if we turned off the invoking, we said no more calling, we hit run and blank. because it's sitting there, but it's never going to execute because we're not calling it. Okay, so the next thing that can be a little bit confusing are arguments. Arguments are values that we pass into functions. So if we come in here and say, testing, this is an argument right here. If we receive the argument, this is called a parameter. And a parameter is saying, hey, I want to know what's coming in me. And then I can come over here and say, console log, I am a function block. And then we can actually bring in the parameter. So we can say save and run. And it should say, I'm a function code block testing. And notice that it's respecting the white space. So we can do that. Clear and run. Sweet. So this is like eluding some of us right now, and that's why I'm taking time to review it. So I want to do like a play-by-play kind of football kind of thing where it's like, first things first, we've got this protect this function. This is the argument. When it invokes, it goes into the parameter. The parameter is just a placeholder. It has no value. It's just listening and saying, hey, did I receive anything? And all it cares about is order. So testing is the thing that's going to be coming in. Then once we go inside the block of code, and the block of code are these curly braces, we then go to this parameter, and you can see that testing took this huge journey over here, all the way into the parameter, which then outputs into the console log right there. So this is, you're going to see this over and over and over and over as your time at Lambda School and as a developer, where you have arguments that are going into parameters, and then we're reading those parameters. Okay, so I just wanted to review that and understand that like these blocks of code, think of it of like where this function was born, if you want to, or citizenship in a country, whatever it is that helps you understand that it belongs to something unique, that is called scope. So anything inside of these curly braces is going to belong to the scope of protect this. Okay, I feel like it was worth a review. I think it's worth going through those things now that you've had a couple of days to let it soak into your mind. Seeing it again, hopefully you're going, oh, that makes a lot more sense after seeing it again. Okay, we're going to jump into our lesson today around objects. So objects in JavaScript, there's a couple ways to think about them. One could be like a super variable, a variable that can hold a lot of really interesting information. Another way to think about objects is a way for us to contain or group properties and values together that we couldn't do in just a variable. So for example, let's say I had a variable and its name was dog. So we'll say let and dog. So we'll assign the value of. Now, if I wanted to talk about my dog's name is Bruce. Bruce the pug. So I have Bruce the pug. The problem is I am now done. I cannot put any more information than Bruce the pug. Now, if I wanted to include like Bruce's, let's see, age, the color of his fur, favorite food, if I wanted to have all these things, it would just be one giant string and I wouldn't be able to access each one of these items later. So it's like anything. Color is, I don't know, I think it's called sable. And then we come over here and it's like age 2. So like if we went in and tried to access this, if I were to try to go like this and say console.log Bruce or dog, because that's the general object that I'm making here. If I tried to, if I wanted to get pug or find out what breed it was, so come over here and say name. Like if I wanted to get this information, I couldn't because it's just one giant string. Now, hypothetically, I could use some string methods and try to explode the string and create an array out of it and do all these crazy things to try to get this information out. But you can see that this is not helpful at all for me trying to use objects inside of JavaScript, or sorry, to get information, I should say. So what if we wanted to access these things individually? Well, I can't because look, clear, run. I try to get dog and I get everything always. So this is where objects can really help us, because if I were then to create, recreate this string example into an object, it would look like this. So it's a let dog, assign the value of, Now here's where things get syntactically interesting. Here comes our good friend, the block of code. So there it is again. There's the block of code we just talked about. Here's another block of code. So this is a block of code. But notice something interesting. The guard, in this case, it looks like a variable name. So if you ever see this, where there's a variable assigning itself to curly braces, this, my friends, is called an object literal. It's literally an object. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of an object literal. So let's start up here and say, how can we get name Bruce? Well, objects actually use interesting orders called name and value pairs. So when you think of pair in English, it's two items. So in this case, if we had name, we can use these colon, and then we can come in here and add Bruce as a string. So now I have a name value pair inside of my dog object. Already there's a huge difference between this and the variable above. So if I come over here and say console.log, I say dog, I can use dot notation or another type of notation we'll talk about in a second, but dot syntax, if you will. And I can actually just say name like that. And then what this can do is it'll access the dog object, so dog, and then access the name property of dog. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save and run. Let's see the difference here. Uncaught reference error, can't access dog before initialization. Does anybody see any issues with my code or anything that I've done so far? Let me open up a thread, sorry. Thread. Oh, someone's already, okay. What's wrong with my code? Okay, go in that thread. Let's see if we can figure it out. Okay, oh, we've got interesting things. We've got commas. We've got all sorts of issues. Should there be a comma at the end? So remember, you should have watched the videos beforehand. So everybody's saying, let's put a comma in here. Do we need to put a comma in here? Let's find out. Save, clear, and run. Aha, Eric's got it. So Eric said, hold up. You wrote console log before you made the variable. Remember how I commented out this line? So console log's going, you don't have anything. So great catch. Make sure you look at the number to understand where the error is coming from. So if it says line 11, notice that it was here. If it was a comma, it'd probably freak out here. So let's remove this comma and see if it works. Remove this console log and comma. So I'm gonna hit clear, save, and run. There's Bruce, awesome. Let's put the comma and see if anything breaks. Save and run. Everything works. Do you need the trailing comma? So stay in that thread really quick. What's wrong with my code thread? In that thread, do I need to have this comma? Is it required, or do I not need it if it's the last item in the object? That's right, it's not. If it's the last item, you don't need it. But if we have multiple items, you do need it. Okay, so we've got let dog assign the value of curly braces. We then have a name value pair of Bruce, and now you can see where we're going to go after this. So we'll say breed, pug, age, 2, color, sable. Now, the way I'm writing this, is this going to cause an error? So I'm going to go back on my thread and say, any errors? So go in that thread and tell me, do you see anything at this point before I run it that's going to cause an error? Okay, let's see. Save, clear, and run. And pug is not defined. What? Line 17. Okay, line 17. Something's different here. That's right. You need quotes. Why do you need quotes? Stay in the thread and tell me why you need quotes. That's right. They are strings. So it's trying to find out if pug's a variable right now. It's trying to say, like, wait, I don't see this variable. Why are you referencing this variable? And the answer is, oh, sorry, it's not a variable, it's just a string. So I'm going to come over here and add strings to all the things that I had as strings. So always, always, always check your JavaScript primitives. Because if you don't know if it's a number, a Boolean, or string, or an object, it's going to get these reference errors because you're trying to reference something that doesn't exist. Good job. Okay, I'm going to hit run. We have dog. We should get Bruce. Awesome. Now let's say we did console.log dog, just the whole thing. Let's see what comes out after this. Interesting. Notice that it does not say dog, it says object. So this is, again, proof positive that we are creating an object literal. The name dog is just a reference. Just like any variable is just a reference, or a function just has a reference. This title right here is actually referencing this object that we're creating. So that's really interesting and can be confusing at first, because I know when I first ran my console log with an object, I expected to see dog up here, but really it's just an object. And I'm using this as a reference. And this syntax, so these curly braces right after the equal signs, is what tells JavaScript that it's an object. Okay, I'm seeing other observations. Grady said, the order changed? That's right. So objects do not care for order. They're just going through and they're grabbing it, and you can see it's alphabetical order in this case. So the problem with this is that you as a developer no longer know if it's in the 0th position, the 1st position, the 3rd position. So objects really are very dependent upon the key and the value. So the items on the left, these are considered keys. They unlock the door to the value. So these are the keys. These are the values over here. So if we focus on the keys, these are the objects. These are part of the items that we can access inside of our reference call. Okay, so here's a new thread. How do I access favorite food? So go in the thread and just everybody write down, just get some fingers on keyboard practice with me. In that thread, how would you access the favorite food? So dog the favorite food, so name wouldn't be working. Dog favorite food. Yep, this is why we do this. We got to learn how this works. So console log dog.favFood. Yep. Okay, so if I come over here and .favFood, you can see clear, save, and run. We should now be getting anything. Awesome. So this, my friends, is how every object everywhere works with properties. So here's a new thread. What is a property of an object you worked on yesterday? So go into that thread, hit that thread, and tell me, is there a property that you used yesterday during your arrays? Yes, so .length is absolutely a property. Now I'm seeing some .math, and of course if we go into different types of functionality, those actually are functions, and those are called methods. So we're going to talk about methods in a second here. So awesome, you're seeing .property. So check this out. Here's hopefully some light bulb moments for all of us. Now that we understand properties just a little bit more, watch what happens when we have this much knowledge. We can now see the array has properties. Isn't that cool? So everything, pretty much everything in JavaScript is derived from an object. Like it's coming from an object. So an array is just a fancy object that everybody has agreed to use inside of a standards committee. So there's a standards committee for JavaScript, and they will introduce, remove, depreciate different objects inside of the ecosystem of JavaScript. And so you can see here arrays have length as one of their properties. Pretty freaking cool. So if we were to go over to the real console and not like the CodePen console, so remember, I'm just in a new browser. You can do this in any browser, by the way. Just hit console. this is really cool. So watch this. Console.dir, whoops, is going to give us the directory of an object, and I've already got an array here. So let's see. So this is going to show us the guts of objects. So I'm going to hit this. We're going to open this up. Now look at this. This is pretty crazy. So we can actually see all of the different object properties, and we can also talk about their methods. So remember how some of you were asking me about prototype yesterday? So here's that prototype, and you can see every single thing that an array is made of. Pretty cool. So to prove that this is true, we can go make a new array. So we can say let new array, assign the value of, open and close, and we'll just say hello as one item. So there's our new array, right? Let's see if it's working. New array, and there it is, it's working. So watch this. If I say console.dir, and I put in my new array, let's see what we get. See, it says it's an array. We open it up, and it says there's one item, hello, and it's got a property length of 1. Then we can actually see everything that inherited from the basic array, which is all these awesome methods that we used yesterday. Isn't that cool? That's how JavaScript works, through this inheritance pattern. So if we go back to our object, this object literal is actually inheriting from the base object of JavaScript. So if we come over here and we try something else out, we can say let object test assign the value of some curly braces. And notice how I'm going down on the next line when I code. You don't have to, but it's a good practice for readability. And so we can come in here and just say some key and a value string, just for an example. So there's our object test to make sure it's working. Oops, object test, there it's working. So now if I do console, let's just clear this out really quick. Oh, didn't clear it out. What am I doing here? Oh, I'm used to terminal. Clear console, there we go. So we come over here, and let's say that we've got our object test. So we can say console.dir object test. Let's see what this comes back at. Look at this. It's an object literal, just like we saw in our console. And if you open it up, we've got our key value pair, and then you can actually see where the prototype, or where it's coming from. You can see everything that is already built in, ready-made to the objects. You can actually do toString, value of is built in. It's a method right there. So we'll talk more about how we can make our own objects, like we just did here. So we just made a new object called dog. We can actually do a lot with this, but at this point, you should be going, whoa, everything in JavaScript is inheriting from something else. That's crazy. So every time that we make a new array, every time we make a new object, it's coming from some other place originally, and that's how JavaScript works uniquely. So name, breed, age, color, favorite food, these are all considered properties of the dog object literal. And of course, these are all hard-coded right now, but we could make dynamic properties, which you're going to be talking about next week. But this week, we just need to understand how these things even work under the hood, so you can start going, oh, array.length actually makes a little bit more sense now, because that means that there's a built-in property that it literally tries to find out every item in the index and give you a number back. So if we were to go look at .length, obviously we know that it's coming from here, but the whole point of .length is to get the length of the array over and over and over again. It's so cool. So in this case, the .name of Bruce, its full purpose is just to get and display the string of Bruce. Okay, so this is now the building block. This is like the primordial ooze of JavaScript is object literals. Everything else just derives from this. So this is the beginning of everything that you're going to see in JavaScript. So cool. Okay, let's jump over to any Slido questions we might have. And we'll do 5 minutes. Oops. All right, 5-minute time. Here we go. Is there a method to search through an array of objects looking for a specific key value pair? Is the for in loop the best way to do this? So we'll be talking about this in a bit, Joe. So hold on to that thought, but yes, you can do that. And you could use the for in loop. That's a great way, but the answer is yes. There is a method to search through an array of objects. But normally, you want to actually just put objects inside of an array. So we're going to talk about that shortly. Sam says, how can we keep the object in the order which it has started? You can't. You just can't. Objects do not allow for that kind of order. So we can use arrays in combination with objects to help us out a little bit. But order doesn't really matter in an object because the key value pair is what matters. So it's a great question, Sam. The answer really is you should know the key, and that's the number one thing. And when I say key, remember it's, my goodness, it's this. This is the key. So that's why objects don't usually, like, you don't have like a million keys. Usually objects are very specifically trying to do something or accomplish something. Great question. Can you use a value to look up a key? No, so you should be looking up, because values can change. Keys should not. So values could be, the name of the dog object could change easily. But so yeah, you don't usually look up a value versus a key. It's the opposite. Eric says, so dog inherits from is an instance of object? Yes. Can we in turn make more instances of dog objects? Yes. So that we can make a dog one, dog two? Yes, totally can. As a copy of original dog object, where maybe they all share the common features and then from there simply modify dog and dog weight? Yep, that is object-oriented programming, Eric. You just described object-oriented programming. So good job. But this is how programmers will use object-oriented programming. They'll make a base class or a base object, and then they'll create new ones off of it with different abilities. And that's like how video games are made. That's how websites are made, and it's pretty cool. Tyler says, when using arrays, does that tell our browser is an array, or can we use anything? Does it have to be ARR? Oh, ARR. Well, no. ARR is just me typing ARR. So going back to this up here, or wherever I was typing in my console, it was just a naming convention. So usually when I'm teaching something, I really despise, just personally, foobar. Everybody uses foobar in the tech community. I just don't like it. It causes more confusion. So I try to be a little bit more specific. So like, for example, up here where I write function, protect this, param, like this is the same kind of thing where it doesn't need to be named param. It could be jibby jab and it would be fine. Or skib, I don't know, I'm making up words right now. Banana, it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent. And so ARR doesn't mean anything different to the browser than param or some other words. That's a great question, because ARR is just a short way of typing array for me to teach. That's all it was for. That's a great question. How do you return objects from a function so you could use it later in your code? So objects are referenced by their identifier. So dog is how we would do that. So if we wanted to reference an object later, we would use dog dot whatever we need to. So this is how you would, this exact line. Later on in some function somewhere else, you could reference dog if it's scoped correctly. Let's see here, give you another minute. I understand the concepts we learned this week, but when it comes to word problems, I find it really difficult with problem solving. Any advice? Yes. So I don't know if you remembered from yesterday, so I'll post it again. I highly, highly recommend you watch this video on how to solve every problem multiple times. Like, don't just watch it one time. So James, that's my recommendation to you. I just posted it in WEB36, but I'm sure other people are. I know I would have loved watching that video a long time ago. Grady says, so the refresh button is the run button when working through the browser console. You could think of it that way for sure. The run button in CodePen is just me controlling when I want to run my code. But in JavaScript, like without CodePen, yes, when the browser loads, It's trying to load everything that you put in the code. So that's a good way of thinking about it, yes. Why does console log alphabetize the data inside your object when you run it? Because objects are unordered. So I don't know the reason why they decided to alphabetize it. It doesn't have to be alphabetized because it doesn't matter. The order doesn't matter. It's the key value pair that matters. Pedro says, in the parameters, is it not good practice to just make them X, Y, and Z? Actually, I don't like doing that, Pedro, because I had a developer I worked with who I love, amazing developer, good friend of mine, but he loved to just do A, B, C all the way through to Z. And it was so confusing because the parameter, I never understood what the parameter was trying to do. So imagine walking into somebody's code like this, and they had X, Y, and Z, and you had no idea what the heck this was supposed to be. And maybe the function was even worse. It was like, ABC. What the heck is that function supposed to do? So Pedro, it's a great question. And the answer is I like to make my parameters more descriptive so the next developer reading my code understands what the heck I was even trying to do. Okay, we have one more question. Juan says, how can I access the console for it to show up in the bottom right side like you? When I open mine, it opens up in a new window and I have to scroll back and forth. Let me show you how I do it. So if we go to a new window, right click, inspect. There's a little tray up here. See these triple dots? If you're in Chrome anyway, it's going to be different for every browser. But you see how it says dock side? So if you want it to be in browser, you can say dock to bottom, dock to left, or dock right. So let's just kind of goof with it. So there's dock left, there's dock right, and then there's bottom. By the way, I only do this because I'm teaching you. When I'm on my own doing my own real projects, I undock it. I actually don't like it in the same window. This is my preference. But if I did this, then you couldn't see it anymore because I'd have to share two windows. So hopefully that helps. Okay, we are now ready for a mental break. So let's take a 5-minute timer. When we come back, we'll continue down the path of object literals. Take a break, step away from the computer. All right, break time is over. Come on back to your computer. And we are going to keep diving into object literals and the notations and the syntax that we're using. So, quick review. Object literals look just like variables at the front, but then they turn into object literals in the back by referencing a code block directly. We then use name value pairs as the insides for properties. So let's call this, we'll come over here and just say it's a block of code so you can see it. And then these are going to be the object properties because these describe the object. Now we're going to introduce something new. So notice I'm going to put a comma in here so we can keep going, but I'm just going to give myself some white space and put a new comment in here and say object methods. So when we were talking about functions, we were talking about array methods yesterday. You know that methods do something, whereas properties tell you something. So methods are quite literally functions housed within objects. That is the definition of a method. And so this is the end of our object, right? End of dog object. So you can see it's nested inside of this object. So what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a new method into the dog object. And the way methods look is they're the same thing as key value pairs. You have a key, so let's make a key called eat. And then we'll have the value, which could be anything that JavaScript accepts. And JavaScript, as we talked about with functions on day 2, allow functions to be passed around as first-class citizens, or basically, we can use functions as values. Don't worry about that. Don't stress. Like if what I just said sounded like craziness, don't worry. Just understand that objects can be part of the name value pair. So here's how they work. I can actually type in function, and that's it. There's my method. Pretty sweet. So in this case, you'll notice that this looks a little weird because it feels backwards from what we've been doing. But this is a key, and the value is a function without a name. Okay, so thread. What is a function without a name called? You're going to see this quite a lot, so that's why I want to make sure everybody understands this. So WEB36 main, what is a function without a name called? It is called anonymous function. Good job. Yes. It makes sense, right? Anonymous, but you're going to hear this over and over and over and over. So I want to call it out now to say this function has no name, but it does have a key. So the key being eat. So that's how we can access the function. So let's say, first off, I always like to test things. So I'm going to come in here and say console.log eating food. So let's just see if we can access this eating food function. Now, the same thing, or method, because remember, it's a function inside of an object. So what I'm going to do now is I've got my favorite food reference there. Now I'm going to say dog, and then I'm going to say dot, because it's the same kind of way you access it, and eat. Now, the interesting thing is when I'm referencing a method, I do need to also invoke the method just like any other function, meaning I got to have some parentheses here, just like every other time we put those in, because we could be passing in values. So we could eat something. So let's see how this works. Let's see how it shows up inside of our console. Save and run. Eating food, and then we get undefined. And so just as a quick reminder, thread y undefined. Hopefully I've been beating this into our heads over the past couple of days. Yes, so Joshua says no return, gotta have a return value. Yes, good job, all of you. No return. So if there's no return value in our function, it's always going to throw this little undefined because it's expecting something to be returned. So that's a great call out. the browser is saying, look, I got your console log, it worked, but I am expecting you to do something with this method and return it back to me. Because remember, console is just for us as humans. Like, we only need it so we can see our code. Computers don't care about consoles. They don't, it's not gonna help them run the app. This is purely for us to debug our code. Okay, so I'm now gonna introduce to you some syntax that hopefully you've been seeing as you've been reading the training kit, but it's called string template literal syntax, or string literals. So up until this point, I gotta be consistent with my double quote and single quote. Remember, it does not matter. Double quotes and single quotes will work, but I'm gonna introduce a third person to the party here, which is backticks. So a backtick is up there next to your number one if you have a full keyboard. So look at your keyboard, look at your number one on it, and look just to the left of it, and that is a backtick. So these backticks are really powerful because they allow us to use a technology or a concept called interpolation, which sounds really nerdy and cool. So if we come over here, we've got these backticks. Now let's just throw eating food into some backticks and see what happens. So just did backticks instead of that. Clear, save, and run. Eating food, and it came back as a string. Sweet. So backticks act like strings, if nothing else, which is great behavior. So this is really good for us to know. But what if we wanted to put in Bruce's favorite food inside of the eat function? That becomes really interesting. So if we were to come over here and actually say, let's eat some food and actually talk about Bruce likes to eat anything, for example, we would want to reference Bruce's name, right? So we could say, so if I wanted to take this right here and say, Bruce likes to eat anything, that's cool, but it's hard coded, right? So it's not dynamic. Nothing will change based on any value that we give it. And so if we wanted to make something more dynamic, we would want to reference it. So if I wanted to take this, here I'm going to draw a little bit. If I wanted to take this Bruce and plug it in here, and I wanted to take this favorite food and plug it in here, I got to use some different syntax because we can't do that with just straight up strings. So that's where these template literals come into play. So if you want to bring in a value that you want to interpret in line, you've got to use this weird syntax. It looks like a $sign and open and close curlies like this. It's just weird looking. You just got to get used to it. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, the freak? So there's $signs and two curlies wrapped around the thing that you want to bring in the value for. So Bruce obviously is not going to do the job here. We've got to bring in Bruce, the name. So what if we did name? Do you think that'll work? So let me go into our thread and say, is that going to work? So just jump in thread and tell me if, before I hit run, if name will work. Okay, so I'm seeing no, I'm seeing some yeses. I'm always interested when I get this mix here. So let me hit run and see what we get. CodePen likes to eat anything. What the freak? That doesn't make any sense. How in the heck did we get CodePen? Well, there's something interesting going on. We are inside of a big object. Here's some matrix moment for all of us. You are living in the matrix. It is called window. So whenever you're in the browser, there's actually a big old object wrapping everything called window. And the name of window right now is CodePen, because we are inside of the CodePen website, and that is the name of the window. So what this is actually trying to do, this name value is going out and going, where am I? And it doesn't know where it is. So it goes to the first thing that has a name, and it's actually window, which is crazy. And so now we're running into a problem of name not knowing where it belongs, even though we clearly have name outlined here. But this function isn't aware of this name right here. It doesn't know that it even exists because we haven't told it that it exists. So now something interesting changes. What if we used dog? What if we came in here and said dog? So just think about this. I won't run another thread, but just think, do you think this is going to work? So let's hit run. Hey, look at that. Bruce likes to eat anything. It did work. So if we actually reference the name dog.name, it does work. But interestingly enough, this could also apply to any object. So if we had another object like cat and I had a name value, I could probably put it in. So it's very, very specifically referenced. It's actually still not aware of the inside guts. So in fact, let's try it out. Let's take this and see if we can actually get another object and see if this works. So we're going to say let cat. And I'm not going to go through all this information more than just name, just to give us an idea. So come over here and we'll just say Lily. And end of cat. Okay. So here's our cat object that we made. And let's see if we can actually reference cat now. See if this works. Save, run. Lily likes to eat anything. Shoot. So that means that we're not actually referencing anything inside. We're just getting direct object key value pairs. You might be saying, well, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that. Well, what's wrong with that is it's so strongly typed that it could never change. So like we always have to put dog or cat here. It's not actually very dynamic. It doesn't know if this changes or not. So then we can start using this new concept that we're going to dive into next week called the this keyword. This allows us to reference the object that it is in. So this is an actual keyword in JavaScript that is looking at this block of scope right here, this code. So that's why I keep talking about these blocks of code. They're so important because they tell us where we live. And this is representative of these blocks of code right here. So these represent this. So anything that is inside of this, we can now reference here or here or here or here, and it's going to be inside of our object. Whereas cat was outside of our object. We don't want that because cat can get deleted and we might get everything ruined. So if a developer came down the line and was like, oh, we don't need that cat object anymore, and they delete it, if you had a hard-coded cat reference, everything would blow up. Versus if you had a this, and it was only referencing inside of this world that we knew and controlled, things aren't going to blow up. So I'm going to come back over here, hit save, hit run. Let's see if we can get Bruce to show up again. There it is. Bruce likes to eat anything. So now we can use this keyword, this keyword, inside of object literals to reference its own properties. That's pretty freaking cool. It's like its own little mini application in some curly braces. Okay, so thread. How could I get favorite food in there? So show me the syntax in that thread for this part right here. So if I wanted to get anything in here, how can I do that using proper object literal syntax? This dot fav food. Nice. Brendan gives me the actual things. Yep, a couple of you. April. All of them. Yes. Perfect. That's exactly right. So we're going to be using our string literals, right? Our template literals here. So we're going to use our $sign, and then we're going to use our curly brace and our curly brace. And of course, we've got to bring in the reference to anything, which is favorite food. So now let's clear this, save it, and run it. Uh-oh, favorite food is not defined. What did I do? Anything I messed up on? Everybody had this keyword. So make sure you've got to have this keyword, right? This dot. Otherwise, it doesn't know what it's actually referencing. So we're going to say run. Now it should work. There it is. Bruce likes to eat anything. So let's get rid of that undefined. We'll just get rid of our console log, basically. because we don't need it. The computer doesn't need it. What the computer needs is a return keyword. So return, again, if you don't have a return in a function, functions are basically pointless. They need to return a value. Like every time you're running a function, you're trying to get something back from it. And so the return value is always at the bottom because anything after here is going to be just totally cut off. Will this work? The answer is no. You'll never see that console because a return statement just shuts it off. So Bruce likes to eat anything. Console log, will this work? Does not show up because the return statement, anything after a return statement just shuts it down. And guess what? You're going to forget this. As a developer, I have had the return statement destroy my life many afternoons as I was building things. And I'm like, why isn't it working? And then I look closer, I'm like, oh my gosh, my return statement was too high and I killed everything. And so just be careful that you keep your return statement at the very bottom of every function that you write per the scope. Okay, so we have now created a dog object literal. We have now created dog properties, and now we have method. So now what I want you to do, we're going to do a breakout session, and I want you to work with your team that you'll be put into randomly, and I want you to make a couple objects. So just make a couple objects and then maybe add a couple methods or a couple properties. I want you to talk about the differences there. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I want you to go create. Of course, you have this object literal that you can reference, but I want you to go create your own objects and maybe make some objects about yourself or maybe about a pet or about something that you love or something that you want to code, but make an object about it and talk about it with your team. So breakout rooms, you're going to go create two objects in 10 minutes and give them some methods and some properties. And then we'll come back and I'll have you share some of them afterwards. All right, so let me go create this breakout room. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, breakout room. 10 minutes, go. Oops, I did not mean to shut those rooms down. Oh, no. Shoot. Oh my goodness. Sorry, everybody. I was trying to add people to rooms and accidentally hit the shut down rooms button. So user error. We're going to try this again. Sorry. So sorry. Oh my goodness. All right, the rooms are opening up again, or back, I should say, shutting down. And I have a special guest with me, none other than Bruce, the pug, named for the object that we created. Say hello, everybody, Bruce. What up, yo? He's a good boy. He's a good boy. Okay, so let's go look at the threads. So I'm gonna put a thread in here and say, thread, show me your objects. So go ahead, jump in the thread and just post using the triple syntax, the triple backtick. So example inside of that thread. And let's go look at some of the objects that you created. Nice, I'm seeing your life. That's a heavy object. Age, name, favorite team, miles walked, return. Yes, perfect. Let me, Marcos, nice. Likes to eat anything, hobby, perfect. Yep, this is great. Seth info. Great, you're totally getting it. Good. Name, age. Sweet, Maria, Maddie. Costume is blue, red, yellow. Ooh, there's an array in that one, Maddie. Nice. Cool. I'm just looking through the thread. I can share my screen so we can reference all this awesome stuff we're seeing in thread. You can see the thread's bigger over here. But this is awesome because it allows me to see how your brains are thinking about this. Ooh, some skills in there. I like that. Very good. Awesome. Okay, I'm going to answer some questions, and then we'll jump into our longer break. So here we go. Juan says, how can you access a specific object with multiple objects in the same array? So we're going to be talking about that next, Juan, after the break. I'm going to be talking about how you can access, basically put objects inside of an array and how it looks, and then how we can access them. We can use for loops, by the way, to do that. So for loops is really the answer with a bunch of objects in an array. Harry says, will we be using anonymous functions frequently? Yes, like crazy. So anonymous functions are going to be part of your life long-term as a developer. I know personally that's not like the thing you want to hear at this stage because they're a little bit confusing, but anonymous functions basically will be turning into arrow functions, and you'll be using those quite a bit next week, and you'll be using those in React a lot. So embrace it. Embrace it. I know it's not fun. I didn't like it at first, and I got used to it. But practice makes decent. For the purposes of doing our assignments, I've been using the console log to print the answers to the console from functions to see my answers. Should I stop doing this? Eric, you should not stop doing this for testing purposes. If you want to like turn the assignment in, you should be using return statements. So does that make there's a difference there. So console log is great for you debugging. It's not great for you getting an answer. So return statements are better. Console log is great for debugging. All right, Sam says, can you go over what the backticks are used for and how they're different from quotes and when to use them? Yeah, I think maybe this was asked before because I just went over it. So I'll keep reviewing that, but I think maybe that was a different time before I went over it. Max, does this mean add more items to the object? So task 1A, write a function to return more menu items with the same format as the items above. Write a function to return more menu items with the same format as the items above. Yeah, that makes sense that you would be adding more items. I don't have a ton of context like right this second to that assignment piece. So if there's more confusion about that, Max, you can DM me. Eric says, so to test the things we would do, eat, function, and then console log would be this is a test, return, and then you'd say this dot name likes to eat this dot food so that we could see our code working. So this console log right here is great for you to test to see if you got in the function. Yes, it's a great way to think about it, Eric. And then once you've got it figured out, you can delete the console log. That's how I work. I always try to log and then get it done. Max, is there a way to, Maxwell, is there a way to print an array or just the keys from an object? Yes, there are object methods that we're going to talk about that we could do that. Can I have functions as values within another function? Yes, so you can do that. And that's really where function expressions become really powerful. But yes, you can. So if you later reassign the var let dog, and you had dog name with an earlier object, would it call the most recent dog name value since you didn't use this? Ooh, that's a great question. So Maxwell, I would say try that out. Put in multiple objects and then see which one it calls. But it should be the one, it'll most likely be the latest one, so the one right before it, because JavaScript does go sequential if all things are equal. Couldn't you get the same result without the $sign and just using this .name? No. So Cameron, if we don't use the backtick literal, the $sign and the curly, it'll break. So if we come over here, if we were to like do that, or if we were to do this, it won't work because it doesn't know. It just thinks it's a string. So if we hit save and clear and run, it'll just say this .name as a string literal. So it's a great question. But we've got to use that special syntax because then it will interpolate. So by the way, if you hear me say a word you don't know, you write it down, interpolate, and then go read it. Insert something of a different nature into something else. Like that's literally what we're doing. And then we can say interpolate in code. What does that mean? In computer programming, string interpolation or variable substitution or variable expansion is the process of evaluating a string literal containing one or more placeholders, yielding a result in which the placeholders are replaced with their corresponding values. So it really just means we're replacing this value with this value. That's a fancy word for replacing values by reference. Interpolation. But you're going to hear that a lot in programming. Oh, did you interpolate that value? And if you're like, oh, that just means did we switch the value for another value? Okay. Let's take a break, our final break. We'll make it a little bit longer since we've been working hard. 7-minute timer, take a break, step away from the computer. When we come back, we will loop through object key values and talk about how we could use arrays with this. All right, welcome back from the break. We've got like basically a half an hour to introduce some new concepts and then review some concepts. I want to show you one of my favorite websites from one of my favorite online educators, Sarah Drasner. So Sarah built this object and array explorer. I'm going to post it in WEB36. First off, there's this really cool anatomy of an object that I think is so great. It's everything we've been talking about. So you can see the object, the key, the value. I just think it looks so clean and easy to read. And so it's nice to have this like basic object. But then if you want to like do something with the object, this will actually like help you build things for objects. This will be more confusing for you now. Like I wouldn't actually mess with this more than looking at this. But the Array Explorer, this thing is freaking dope for like where you've been. So I have an array. I would like to add items or other arrays. I need to add an element to an array. And then it'll show you like a great method to do it and then give you an example of some code. And so this is similar to erasing, but it's even more like you can go even further. And it's pretty freaking cool and gives you ideas on how to approach arrays using, again, English first. So it's just super cool and gives a ton of information very quickly. So I have this one favorited. I'll use it all the time if I need to like chew on some array methods. This is a great place to go. And of course, if you need to do anything with objects, it's just this little button up here. So that's just a thing that helps me personally, and it's always good to share. Okay, so some of you were asking about how do we get, a lot of questions actually were about how do we get the keys and the entries out of the object literals. So again, MDN, object methods, there we go, just type that in. And then this will give us a reference to the object in MDN. So object. The object represents one of JavaScript's data types. It is used to store various keyed in collections and more complex entities, as we've seen. So of course you can read all about objects, but remember how to read documentation on MDN. They have the properties and they have the methods. Now notice if there's a thumbs down, that means it's being depreciated and should not be used by developers. So if you ever see a thumbs down, just go, oh, I probably shouldn't do it. Then if you see a trash can, that means it used to be supported and is no longer supported in browsers. So be careful to watch those. So there's a lot of methods, just like arrays have methods, objects have methods. And so if we were to go in here and look at like keys, because some of you were saying, well, could I get all the keys? Absolutely, you can. So let's go ahead and look at how this works. So object.keys, object one. So notice that it's object like the actual keyword object. So let's go take this and see what happens. So if we come over to our dog object, and we say console log, notice that it's grabbing the object keyword, dot keys method, and then we're throwing in our object, so it's going to be dog. Let's see what that looks like. Save and run. And now what it does is, guess what? It returns an array. So if we come over here and you can see at the bottom, the return value is an array of strings that represent all the enumerable properties of the given object. So there you go. Now you can start referencing those items through the array. So we could start looping over these. We could do a bunch of different things with these using keys. So the same thing, it's really just you versus reading. Like, how much do you want to know about this information? Entries is really interesting because it's both. It's the keys and the values. So if we go look at it, it's the same context, or sorry, syntax. We just got to say entries instead of keys. So go over here, swap out keys, put in entries, save and run. We'll see the new, what it looks like compared to it. So entries gives us each key value pair inside of our object, and we can access them. Because it's an array, we can of course put it inside of a variable. So we could say let, my object entries assign the value of, grab these, and then now we'll have access to my object entries, which again returns an array. So we should be able to use array syntax now. So get rid of this crazy stuff, grab this thing, because now it's an array. So let's just test our knowledge first. We've got a lot of console logs. We're just going to comment them out for a second. So we clear this up, save and run. Now we're only going to log this, and you can see it's just an array. So if I come over here and I get the like 0th position of the array, let's see what it returns. Save and run. Now you can see it's got the first item in my array, which is going to be Bruce. Pretty cool. So it does actually order them at this point. And we could do like reverse or filter, or we could do anything we could do on an array using this. Pretty sweet. So that's just 2 methods available to you. Of course, there's more. Now, here's the thing where JavaScript gets overwhelming, if it isn't already overwhelming enough at first as a new beginning learner. You see all these and you're going, wait a second, Josh, do I need to memorize every single one of these methods? No, you don't. They're just there for you to use as a tool. And so if you get stuck on a problem, at least you know where to go in the documentation. So for example, on the sprint challenge, you may get an array method that you've not seen before. And so you're going to go to MDN, look up arrays, look up the method and see what it does. Like, use this as a dictionary for your brain, not as something that you should be memorizing and stressing about. So I always have this on lock in terms of like the first place I go if I'm trying to solve something for JavaScript is going to be MDN. And if it's confusing, I'm always trying to look at the demonstration first. I try to get the demo working in my code, bring it over. Like, it's not something where I just go, oh, it's this, oh, it's this, oh, it's this. That's not how it works. Unless you've been coding specifically in a specific spot for years and years, which just never happens. So you will become attuned to like 2 or 3 methods that you really like, and you'll start to like use them. They'll be your go-to methods, but you don't need to memorize all these. So if you're having a freak out right now, a little panic attack, and you're going, holy crap, there's so many methods, that's okay. It's normal. That's why I introduced you to that link from Sarah Drasner, like this one, so you don't have to memorize things so much. You just know like where to go. And also like erasing, and of course MDN. Like, these are just tools to help you solve problems. But don't think you have to memorize them. Don't think you have to know what each one does, because I don't. I really don't at all. Okay. So that's those were just to answer some of the questions that we saw earlier about like how we could access those. We can also jump into our own, we can make our own arrays that contain object information. So we've got this prepared array I want to show you called places. So here's an array called places. It's got all these different places in the world. And so if I were to log this, places, let's see what comes in. So save, clear, and run. So you can see I've got a bunch of objects that have a bunch of object literals, just like we did with dog, but these are all the different places around the world. So you'll actually see this quite a bit when you're looking at data structures in the future, in the very near future. This will look like JavaScript objects. And so maybe you've heard the term JSON. That is JavaScript Object Notation. And so you will be using JSON objects, which look very much like this, to work with other companies' information and process information back and forth, which we call APIs. So the stuff I'm teaching you is truly fundamental in that you might be looking at this dog thing going, when am I ever going to use something like that? And I'm going, actually, all the time when you're accessing other people's data through APIs or application programming interfaces. Oftentimes, the JavaScript object notation objects you see here are just literals like here, just like Bruce. It's just, they're going to have different information. So yes, everything we're teaching you is very applicable to the very near future of what you're going to be doing. And there's no better way than to write your own objects. More often than not, just so you know, I'm not writing my own custom objects every day. Just to give you an idea, this is more like writing custom objects is great so you can understand how to use objects in the future. But your everyday life as a developer looks much more like arrays and functions and less like creating custom objects every day. So just keep that in mind. This is good for you to know, but you don't have to like give it a huge brain space and memorize how all objects work. You just need to know how properties and methods work and how you can access like MDN and read documentation. Okay, so don't over freak out about all this information, even though it's easy for me to say that, but I'm saying that to you knowing your future is not going to be like writing objects every single day, unless you get into more back end and architectural things, and then you might be doing things like that, but it's because you're going to like it, not because you have to do it, because you're going to be finding your niche. So if we wanted to go through these places and iterate over a loop, let's kind of walk through that just so you can see this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new array because I don't want to ruin my old array. So I'm going to say let, and let's just go Middle East, since there's 1, 2, 3, there's 3 of them. Let's do that. So we'll say Middle East. So I can set that up. I'm going to assign it to be a new array because I want to fill it up. So I'm just going to set up an array for me to fill up. Then I'm going to use a good old-fashioned for loop, which we've seen every day so far. And remember, for loops, we can set up our integer. So we can say let I assign the value of 0, semicolon. Then we can do is going to be I is less than or equal to. And then what I'm going to put in is my array name, right? Places. Because I want to go over the original array. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate, right? So I'm going to say I plus plus, because I want to go through that. Now, of course, I want to go through each one of these items in the array. So how could I go through each item of the array? And specifically, let me open up a thread here and say, thread, how do I go, or how do I get a number for the whole of the array? Let's go ahead and thread and just give me a reminder of how you do that. That's right, dot length is right. So we're going to come over here, dot length, so we can go through the array. Now, let's find out like what we're even getting. So we'll come back here, console.log, our good and trusted friend for helping us understand where we are. And then I'm going to say, hey, do we actually think, are we actually where we think we need to be? So places. Now, this is where I think I'm seeing some confusion yesterday. And I want to call it out here to say, let's talk about it. So if I wanted to find out each individual place, like if I just did places like this, it's going to log every time. So I'm going to get rid of this because I don't want to have this huge array. Save and run. Let's see what we got right now. It's going to log the array every single item that goes through inside of this, right? So for all the places dot length, console log places. And so it's going to go through and get those things. But if I want to get individual objects, I've got to be able to say the I position. Because remember, this I is letting me know where I stand. So it starts at 0. We have a 0 here. And then we come over here to our length. So let's see what's going on here. Save and run. And now we can look at each individual object. So those each individual objects I can now do something with, compare the data with. So this was yesterday and Tuesday, right? But I think a lot of us, just in what I've been observing in questions, are not understanding or not fully grasping this I position. So let's just do let's do one more thing and then I'll do a walkthrough of like how this works. So we'll say if, and we'll put a little thing in here. And let's say that we wanted to find out if the region that we were looking at was the Middle East. So we'll come over here and we'll say, okay, if places, right? Because we want to make sure we get this ith position. So we got to find out places. So it's going to look at each individual object. But remember, these are full-on objects. These are not like, these are not variables. So if I wanted to get the region, so here comes a thread. Thread, how can I get the region? So go into that thread. How can I get the region? You now know how to access objects. How do you access that? So I'm seeing dot region, dot includes. So Cameron, that's interesting because you are used to looking at an array of values and going, find something that includes. But if you think about it, Cameron, these individual objects are the items. So they're like kind of big curly braces. So we've got to go dig into the object. And so that's why we can use object notation to say region, like a lot of you were suggesting. That's pretty cool. So if I wanted to get each region instead of each object, let's see what that looks like. Cool. So Middle East, North America, Middle, all these things. Okay. So now we know that we're getting this, so we can comment this log out. It doesn't matter anymore. We'll bring it in to say region. But that's how I test. Remember, console log is for testing. So then if we come over here, and now we've got our region, we know what we are in. Well, actually, we don't know yet because we got to do our if statement. So we've got to find out if it is equal to, and then we got to make sure that the string matches what we're looking for, which is Middle East, right? Because we're just saying, hey, does it match this? Yep, it will. If it does match it, what do we want to do? Well, we want to create this new Middle East array and add more to it. So we'll say Middle East dot push from yesterday, because we learned that dot push can actually add items to an array. And then what we'll do is, in fact, I don't want anybody getting confused. Let's log in here too. So we'll say console.log, and we'll say places, because this is how you can always work, just step by step. Save and run. So now we've got it filtered down to an even smaller group. So now you can see I've only got my Middle East pieces, right? So it's looking at those things every time. So then I come in here and I say, okay, now I'm going to push this because I want to have each one of these objects in my new array. So I'm going to say Middle East, easy, push, and then we'll say places, and the ith position will be added to the array. So again, console log was just a helper, doesn't do anything. Save, clear, and run. Oh, we got, let's see, we still have the error here. Type error, cannot read property region of undefined. So if places region, let's see, am I spelling that right? Region. It is actually getting it though. That's interesting that it says it's undefined. Any ideas on that? So we'll come over here and we'll say thread. Oh, we got people already saying the for loop should be not that. Aha. So if we look over at the for loop, you can see that we had an assignment over here. So we're trying to figure out all the length of the loop instead of assigned value. So let's see if that works. That shouldn't be the type error though. Let's see, that'd be interesting. It looks like it was the issue because we were trying to go outside of bounds with that. Disregard that if you're confused. It was just me accidentally putting in an assignment there because we were just trying to figure out less than the amount of length. All right, so now we've got push. So if we came out here and we said console.log, just to see the Middle East array, how it changed. So we'll say after, and again, this is where I'll use like one concatenation because it's just one item instead of doing a whole $sign. And then I could say before. So before we'll see our Middle East, it should be a block of code. After we should see the Middle East being filled with the 3 different places. So I'm going to hit save and run. So before we have the Middle East is empty, great. After we then get all these different objects, but that's how it should be because it doesn't know what the objects are, right? It just has the key value pairs. So it's like object, 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 object. So if we were to go into these objects, now we can go, we have a new array. So if we went in here and we were like, well, the Middle East in the 0th position, what does that give us? Save and run. Let's see what that shows up as. Object, object, right? So after object, object. So if we have this object, do you think that we could dot notation into it to see the region? So let's, or the city or anything about it? Let's go see. So I'm going to hit save and run. Let's see what we find out. Aha, so there's the inside of the object. And in this case, I got to put a little space because it matters. so it doesn't look all jumbled up. So this is how we can use objects and arrays together to solve problems. So if we've got a big chunk of information that you're going to probably get in your module assignment today, then you'll be able to understand how to loop through those individual objects and use both object notation and array notation. Isn't that cool? So we're using arrays to find out where they land, and then we're using object notation to dig into the properties. So let's stop and do some questions. Is Edabit a good realistic website to practice our JavaScript skills? Let's see. I don't think I've ever heard of that before, but that doesn't mean I don't. Let's see. Learn to code. Edabit. Yeah, I think so. Let's go JavaScript, see what they got. Yeah, this is super great. Whatever tool you want to use, but this looks great as far as just getting practice. So to answer the question, Harry, yes. When we are learning about objects and arrays on our own time, is it a good idea to study all object array methods or some of the ones we will never use, excluding thumbs down? No. So Sam, this is not a good idea right now, just too much to do. So I would not be like going crazy trying to study every array method right now. It's kind of fun to go through and see what they do. But we're going to continue to introduce you to new array methods next week. They're going to be called advanced array methods like map, reduce, and filter. And those array methods are going to be combined with new concepts like closures and callback functions and different things like that. So that's next week. But this week, I would just say focus on the assignments that you've been given and see how they can help you. So great question, but don't overwhelm yourself, Sam. Bria says, inside the Canvas training kit, the CodePen practice access to use the for each method. Can you show us how to implement this method? So in the for each method, this is actually pretty cool. It is going to be a forbidden method, I think, in one of the projects because it's actually like a super easy for loop, and we want you to learn how to use for loops first, because then you're going to just probably use for each till you don't. But the for each method allows you to execute a provided function once for each array element. So it's like an easier version of a for loop. So a for loop is kind of difficult in that we have to put in each individual item over and over and over again, right? But a for each loop already knows how many items are coming in based on the index that we want to run it. So it's pretty cool that, so in this case, it's just going through every item. It already knows for every item inside of the array do this. So we don't have to do array.length. Like that's all that does. It eliminates array.length and makes it easier for you. I don't really want to confuse anybody right now with for each. We've been focusing on for loops. So really, if you want to go into it, dig into this, but for each is going to be happening more next week. Why does it say object and not list the object itself like it did before? It's the same reason, Maxwell, that remember when we did console log with the dog and it said object? Because it's basically coming back and saying, hey, this is what I found. Just like we would have number or string or undefined, object is also part of that ecosystem. So in JavaScript, when we write something, I don't know if you remember at the very beginning when we just console logged dog, it has object. So if we come over here and say console log dog, this will give us just a naked object as well, or just this object right there. And so of course the objects have items inside of them. But when we're going through all of these, the JavaScript console is just saying, hey, look, you've got objects. So when we did this thing right here, Middle East, and it was just object, object, object. It's the same thing where it says object here, same thing, object here. The lowercase o versus the uppercase O is unique, but we're not going to get into that right this second. The giant O just means that this is the base class of an object, and the lowercase o is the object itself. So don't stress about that. It really doesn't matter right now. Just understand that we're going into each one of these objects, and that's why we know what we're working with, right? We've got the objects up here, but it is Tel Aviv. So really interesting stuff. Keep holding on to those good thoughts, but ultimately don't stress out about that right now. How do we turn a big block of info text without the syntax into a JSON object that we could use in our code without typing each bracket and quote? There are JSON converters. So Sam, you can actually just Google this. JSON string converter, or JSON string convert to JSON object. Like, there's a lot of different tools out there. You can literally just click on one of them, paste in your stuff, and it'll convert it to an object for you. So your Google is as good as mine, but that's how you would do it, Sam, if you didn't want to go in and add each individual bracket. Pedro says console log after Middle East 0. If you put a 1 in the console log where the 0 is, would it not work because Toronto is not the Middle East? So let's go look at that one, Pedro. So if we come over here and we say Middle East 1, remember that we're getting all 3 objects. So it's going to go to the next Middle East. So remember this right here, Pedro, right there. So if you read that, it says places. So places. The ith position, which is going to go through. You know what? Let's just do a little walkthrough of this play-by-play. So we'll come down here and we'll talk about exactly what's going on. So what we're doing is we've got a string. So that's going to be there, right? There's our string. That's it. Pretty simple. We're concatenating, so we're using the plus sign to go through. That's fine. That just means we're adding it so we can get this space here. Then we've got Middle East. So where's Middle East coming from? Well, Middle East is coming from here, right? Because we made an array called Middle East. We're saying in the 1 position in the index. So where the heck is that coming from? Well, we'll get to that in a second. And then where is city coming from? Well, city is coming from all the way up here. So wherever the city came from. So that's how this whole line breaks down. So that's like the line breakdown, but let's figure out how we got this I position. So it doesn't look crazy. I'm going to delete those, come back here. So what's happening is we're running a chunk of a for loop. So this for loop is just running sequentially on line 61. So the code runs for let is assigned the value of 0. So this just means we have a 0 sitting here right now. This I in its current state is 0. And then we have places.length. Now remember, what is places? It's this array up here. It's this whole chunk up here. So it's saying dot length. Well, remember in an array, we have a certain amount of items. So I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is the number that we're actually looking at, because just how many items are in that array. So this actually is being interpolated as a 7. And then 0 plus plus is what's going on here. So there's nothing has happened at this point. So this is the first time this thing runs through. This is what it looks like. Then it says, hey, I have not reached, this is not true yet. So 0 is not going to be greater than 7 at this point. So do it again. So if we're doing it again, it goes into the block of code. We then go into the block of code and we're saying, hey, if the places in the ith region, so where's the ith region? Well, places is our array. What is the 0 position? Because remember, this 0 is I. So this I is like right there, that's 0 right there. So places in the 0th position, what is that? And it's going through the first part of the array. I got to scroll up a little bit. Sorry, there's the array. So if we look at the 0th position of the array, it's this, right? It's the first item in the array. So that is being chunked into there. Boom. And then we're using dot notation that we just learned about with objects, and it's going, where's the region? Ding, 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 ding. There's the region, Middle East. So it's grabbing Middle East, and then we're using a triple equals operator, and we're going, hey, what the crap is inside this? Is it Middle East, the string that I'm giving you? So it's like we're asking the question. And then it goes, hey, is this Middle East? And it goes, yep, it's Middle East. Keep going. If it said no, it would then break this if statement and go back in a loop and start over again, and it would do the I++. So then this number would become number 1. But because we got the yes, it jumps inside the body and goes, okay, Middle East, you're an array right here. We're going to use this push method, and we're going to go into places in the ith position, which we now know is this one, right? Tel Aviv. So then now Middle East has Tel Aviv pushed into it. And so now it's going to be stored for later until the for loop's done. So that's the first loop. Just that one loop, all that explanation happens in a millisecond in JavaScript. And then we just rinse and repeat until we fill up all 7, because remember there were 7. So then we come over here and it goes +1, right, because of this plus. And so it says, okay, now 1 places, then it goes to the next item, which is Toronto. Then it says, hey, is Toronto passing my string test? And it goes, nope, Toronto is not in the Middle East, it's in North America. So then it kicks out and goes through the loop again and says, all right, what am I going to do now? And it says +2, right? Because we're just adding 1 every time with this plus. Then it goes down the line. I'm not going to do it every time, but that's what a loop does. And so it goes through and just boom, 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 boom. And then, so the answer to your question, Pedro, is that, like, it's not going to get Toronto because it doesn't pass our if statement. Does that make sense? Okay. Whew, there we go. For loops are a mouthful, and that's why programming is so powerful, because as a human, it took me forever to explain that, right? But as a computer, it's like, it just knows exactly what to do. Josh, how do you add the / comment sign to multiple lines at once? So what I do is I'll grab all of the code here with my cursor, and then I'll use Control/, and it'll just do a big old chunk. That's super helpful. Then Control-Z to undo it, of course. Or you can do Control / again to do it again. Pretty nifty. Okay, we are at time today. So your assignment this afternoon is going to be dealing with this exact stuff, of course. So you're going to be building objects. You're going to be nesting objects. We didn't really talk about nesting objects. Let me just talk about it briefly to say it's just like you would think, but maybe it's not super clear. So let me talk about this. Let's say we had the brother of Bruce. So Bruce doesn't have a brother, but we'll just pretend. We'll come in here and say that's exactly how you would nest an object. And then you just rinse and repeat. So it's like, boom. Let me format that. By the way, that was Shift-Tab that lets you do that cool formatting. So in this place, I could then have a nested dog. So I could say dog.brother.name. That's the same kind of thing. So if I came in here and just said clear, save and run, you could see that, let's see, where to give me others an error somewhere else. Unexpected identifier. Oh, I gotta have a comma there because it's inside of an object. Okay, maybe it's not so clear. If you're, of course, introducing a new object, you've got to make sure we're following the rules with the commas. So there we go. There's Bruce again. We'll say Bruce's brother. Oh, can't use a semicolon there. Bruce brother. You can escape those out, but let's just see what this looks like. Bruce brother should show up. There it is. Sweet. So this is how you nest an object. That'll show up in your assignment today as well, but everything else is everything we've talked about. We went a little deeper on this because everybody was asking so many questions, so I hope you felt there was a lot of value there. Okay, everybody go to your break. I will be sending you a sprint challenge study guide in WEB36, so you can just make sure you're prepared for the whole week before you get that sprint challenge. So it'll just be a study guide reviewing everything we've already talked about. And then I'll be in the Q&A with you, if optionally. I think it's going to be towards the middle of the afternoon or the end of the afternoon. I'll drop a note. And then this is my last time teaching you. So it was great being your instructor for this week. Britt will be teaching next week, and she'll be going over advanced JavaScript. And hopefully we set you up for success with fundamentals. I'll be doing a Q&A on Friday, so this won't be like the last time you see me, but this is the last time I'm going to be teaching you like a module like this. So thank you for being patient as we've swapped instructors. We did it by design. We're trying out some things where we want to see what it feels like as a student to go through multiple instructors in a unit, because in the past we've been doing one instructor for a unit. Anyway, I'm going to be sending you a survey next week to see how you felt. Was it too jarring to have two different teaching styles in one unit, or was it actually helpful to hear different voices? So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be asking you. So thank you for being part of our experiment. It's not really an experiment. Like, I've been teaching this for a very long time, but I am definitely crashing Britt's party. So thank you to Britt as well. Okay, thanks everybody. I'll see you tomorrow in the Q&A, or this afternoon in the Q&A, and then we'll do a sprint challenge review on Friday. Bye.